Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Well, a scramble for support on Capitol Hill this week following President Obama's decision to seek congressional approval for a strike on Syria. A divided Senate Foreign Relations Committee narrowly passed a resolution authorizing military action, previewing the challenge ahead for the administration when lawmakers return from summer recess on Monday. But speaking in Stockholm, Sweden Wednesday, Mr. Obama made it clear that he won't take the fall if Congress fails to act.
My credibility is not on the line. America and Congress's credibility is on the line because we give lip service to the notion that these international norms are important.
Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, foreign affairs columnist Bret Stephens, assistant editorial page editor James Freeman, and Washington columnist Kim Strausel. So, Dan, you wrote this week that you think Republicans and Congress should support the president's call for the use of force resolution. Why?
Well, let me preface it by saying that Barack Obama does not make it easy to convey this point of view.
Why?
Because he's done such a poor job of defending his own position and the institution of the presidency, which is my point. This is not merely about a country called Syria or about a president named Barack Obama. It's about the institution of the presidency, which has committed the United States in this region. It's also about the fact that the world is not a static place, Paul. It is volatile. It is always volatile. And if the United States Congress, its legislature, is seen handing the President of the United States a defeat on this, pulling him back out of the world into Washington, then places like the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, which is being disputed by China and Japan, or even Iran and the idea of nuclear proliferation there, all of these things will start to be enhanced. And I think that is the risk that we're running by defeating this resolution.
James, 40 months to go in this presidency,
right.
Thereabouts. It would be quite a signal to the world. What do you think?
It would be great if we had another president, but I think Congress should vote no, because the truth is they can't really vote to give the president credibility just as they can't vote to give him humility or wisdom. So I think as you look at it here, basically he is asking a lot of people, given that he hasn't defined the mission clearly, and ultimately it comes down to two possible outcomes, and they're both bad.
But what about that signal that Dan made, the point that Dan made, that if the Congress denies him with this much time left in his presidency, you're going to send a signal to the world that it's open season?
He's been sending those signals nonstop for the past week, and this is, I know, why it's so difficult to support him. Even the red line, there's an argument that once the President of the United States draws a red line, we ought to back him up. He basically said, "Oh, I didn't draw that red line. Wasn't me." So he's made it very unclear what he's doing there. He originally started out saying he wanted to make sure he didn't hurt Assad. Now, after talking to John McCain, it seems like he's willing to consider victory, but then that victory leads to what? A civil war there that I know he doesn't want to engage in.
Brett, what about the point that James makes about the inadequacy, uncertainty of the military strategy here, that it looks just to be punitive for the sake of responding to the chemical attacks, and therefore it's inadequate?
Well, look, as you've pointed out, you go to war with the president. You have, just to adapt Rumsfeld's famous line. It was useful to hear the president seem to offer a much more robust military response in demands to people like John McCain. But that task is made much more difficult for McCain, for Lindsey Graham, for the more hawkish side of the Republican Party when they're fighting a war with the kind of Rand Paul wing.
Right, but you still think it's worthwhile?
Absolutely, it's good politics, and I think it's the right policy. It's good politics because I think President Obama is desperate to blame the Republican Congress for a defeat, for tying his hands. I think he'd actually like that, or he wouldn't be hurt by it. And it's the right policy because the alternative is a Congress which, as Dan said, is constraining the president when he is in fact prepared to act against a rogue regime using chemical weapons tied to Hezbollah, tied to Iran. These are not trivial American national security interests, and we ought to be cognizant that this is a regime that is a state sponsor of terrorism using weapons of mass destruction.
What message would it send to Iran, Dan, if Congress denied the president the ability to attack on Syria? Would they assume it's open season for the rest of this presidency?
Well, I think they would. The first thing they would do is understand that their supplying of arms to Assad, which they're doing by flying over Iraq, could continue and increase, augmented by the Russians, raising the possibility that Assad would win. And then if Assad wins, you've got the Iranians creating a kind of hegemony in the Middle East. Turkey and Saudi Arabia would have to, I think, come to a condominium with Iran.
Okay. Kim, let's talk about the politics. Does the president have the votes right now as it stands here on the weekend?
He does not, and here's the problem. The people that would be most likely to support a president in strong military action, the Republicans, are, for all of those reasons that were just set out in this show, not likely to rally around him. A lack of strategy, the lack of work he's put into rallying public support, which means that the real lift here is going to be on the Democratic Party, the president's party, and they are the party that is genetically against any sort of action overseas. And so you've got dozens of Democrats who have come out already in opposition to this. And the president has been gone all week. His party is fracturing. He's got a lot of work he's going to have to do if he wants to get this over the finish line.
Kim, the Republican speaker, John Boehner, and his deputy, Eric Cantor, both came out early in support of the president. So that would seem to be a signal to some of the Republican members. Look, you have some political cover if you want to support the president. Are they whipping this?
They are not whipping this vote. And, you know, what you hear when you talk to Republican members, though, Paul, is an immense frustration because they go out and they have, you know, they're talking to their constituents, they're home on recess. Public sentiment is running about 9-1 against this. And they keep saying, the cover we need is from the president, who is the only one who can go out and make an address and convince the American people that this is the right thing to do.
So what does the president have to say to sell this?
Look, the Americans, people are usually, they're not, pro-war by nature, but they are always open to an argument that this is the right and proper thing to do. You know, we know this president knows how to sell things. He is famous for crisscrossing the nation to sell his domestic agenda. He's got to go out there and do this in Iraq and point out what Dan and others were saying about the line and the importance of American credibility.
He has to make clear what is the strategic national interest here, why it's important to do it, and actually sound like he means it for a change. All right. When